I'm really happy to introduce our next panel, which is called Take a Leap, and it's going to be shared by Rashmi Karanth from Quasar, and really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
As our chair pointed out this morning, a nation that forgets history has no future. Before we actually take a leap into the future, we thought we need to reflect very briefly, in the interest of time, on the journey that has brought us here today in terms of evolution of computer science. And I'm so privileged to welcome our panel here. So we've got Liz Jakubowski, Director, National Skills Commission, Professor Maurice Pagnucco, Deputy Dean of Faculty of Engineering, UNSW, Chris Ferrie, Associate Professor, University of Technology, Sydney. Welcome. I can't wait to discuss and take the leap straight into the future of what it means to be a computer science graduate and the skills that we need. So Maury, if I can start with you, reflecting back on the evolution of computer science 70 years ago, can you share your thoughts on some of the key developments since that conference?
Okay, thanks Rashmi. And thanks Kai, because I was sitting there just a moment ago looking back at what this panel was supposed to be talking about, and then I said, oh, education, yes, that's right, we're talking about education. So fortunately, I wrote myself a few notes here, and the first note was, I actually spent 10 years of my life in the Madsen building, 500 meters from here, from about 1985 to early 96, completing my degrees in computer science, in what was then the Vassar Department of Computer Science. Now, if anyone knows a little bit about the history of one of Australia's first computing departments, is that it was funded by a donation on the back of the outcome of a horse race. My fellow students at the time also had gotten their hands on an anagram generator, and the notice board on the sign in the entrance of this building that told you that it was a Vassar Department of Computer Science was changed to the Department of Pure Cosmic Beans. And no one had noticed for months. Like we would walk past it all the time and just laugh, and it just stayed like that for months. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is just because I was trying to convey a bit of the sense of the excitement of studying computer science at that time. We were pretty lucky. I was really fortunate. Ken Thompson of Unix and C fame was one of my lecturers, and he was probably one of the most, I would say he had a childlike fascination for computer science that I hadn't really seen before. If anyone knows anything about Ken, he also had one of the early computer chess champions, and he would tell us about computer chess. He would tell us about a whole range of things that they were using computers to do. The World Wide Web was created in my honours year, and I remember at the time later, my fellow PhD students were earning like $80 an hour to write HTML. I felt that they weren't really spending a lot of time on their PhD studies. One of the other interesting things about that building was that if you walked in from this side on the lower ground floor, there was a little computing museum. And one of my lecturers, Alan Bromley at the time, had collated that. There were a lot of mechanical and digital machines in that foyer, and I'd spent like a lot of time having a look at them. I was always amazed at how many of them had military applications. He was also quite interested in another device, the Antikythera mechanism. Look it up if you haven't seen it. It was dug out of an ancient Greek wreck, and they thought it was a lump of rock. When they looked at it, they noticed it had some gears in it, and then they tried to figure out what that device was. And I remember him telling us this great story that he would spend his sabbatical going to Athens to look at this device and study it. And one day they were taking it to be x-rayed, and it accidentally fell and it broke in half. And he was saying, oh my God, they're never going to get us back here again. But that turned out to be a really fortuitous moment because they were able to image the interior of the machine. The last thing I'll tell you is that I was actually studying mechanical engineering, doing sort of a dual degree, and I had to do computer science. I thought I knew all there was about programming at the time, having taught myself to write a few lines of BASIC. So I didn't even think of doing computer science. And then during one break, I took this textbook written by one of the lecturers, Leslie Goldschlager, Computer Science, and I read it from cover to cover. I think it's the only textbook I ever read. And in the middle of that textbook, I got to the bit that talked about problems that you couldn't solve on a machine. And I go, oh, hang on a minute. Like, what do you mean there are problems you can't solve on a machine? And I'm going to come back to that in a moment because I still think that's one of the greatest fascinations of computer science. So, sorry, I'm probably taking a little bit too long here, but let me just quickly go back to the conference. I had a bit of a read of the proceedings, thanks to Barbara and Peter, who sent me a copy, and Sir John Madson's welcome at the beginning of that, so the first 10 pages. And here's a couple of quotes. So, one was, computing has traditionally occupied an intermediate position between theory and practice. And I would say that holds true today. I tell people that computing is the greatest unsolved problem of our lifetime. Some people think it's cancer, some people think it's climate change, but hey, it just happens to be computation. There is so much that we don't know about it, and there's $1 million prize for anyone that can work it out. Another quote, the conference is to take place in 2 sessions, the first of which is arranged primarily for the user, in quotes, which fascinated me. I didn't really think they were so user-oriented in those days. It is hoped that this session will serve as a clearinghouse for examining facilities in the light of requirements. The second session is intended primarily for those who are directly concerned in computing and with computing devices. And as Wayne nicely pointed out at the beginning, there was a big debate at the time. Was it analog? Was it going to be digital? On digital machines, Manson goes on to say, since they work with numbers in digital form, they can be applied to calculations which can be reduced to finite sequences of arithmetical operations. And in particular, they cannot deal with continuous variables, which was the whole point of having the analog devices. Now, of course, digital machines dominate, quantum machines may dominate in the future, but they're still effectively digital, or more digital in that sense. There were details of the Harvard Mark I and the ENIAC computer at Pittsburgh, EDSAC at Cambridge, and as Wayne pointed out, Pearcey's machine was the 4th electronic stored program computer in the world. So in terms of recent developments in digital machines at the time, and that some are taken for granted, here's another quote. Of the more recent developments, the one which is most important in principle is the use of the same form in the machine for operating instructions as for numbers. The machines can use the facilities of the arithmetical unit to modify its own operating instructions in the course of a calculation. And if you looked at the descriptions of the machines, they're quite familiar to us today, but as you can see, these were quite groundbreaking concepts at the time. One last quote, in tracing the development of computing machine, one feels impelled to pay tribute to the contribution of the business machine manufacturers. So even at that time, there was a very close connection between industry and computing. I've already talked about computing in wartime activities. A list of other things that are mentioned in that welcome were mercury switches, cathode ray tubes, magnetic drum storage. My God. Okay, so wrapping up and going back to what we were going to talk about, here are just a couple of things that I think in education we need to consider today. A lot of these have already been mentioned, so I'll go through them quite quickly. The first are ethical considerations, particularly around AI, machine learning, data privacy, and so on that others have talked about. Environmental factors and a sustainable computing future. So over the break, I was reading a former colleague of mine, Kate Crawford's book on Atlas of AI, and it really does talk about things which are not sure AI is one of the issues, but I think you'll see a lot of them in other things, cryptocurrencies and so on, and that is the environmental impact that our industry is having. And again, when I was a student, it was certainly not a consideration in anything that I was taught at the time. Yet again, another one that's been brought up, the politicization of computing. So computing supremacy has become a political battle for economic supremacy, not just in what we're seeing in the Ukraine today, but just in terms of the economics and growing the economies of the world. I've just got 2 more points. One's on the computer science problem-solving paradigms and the need for speed. So during my time as a student, I learned about, imperative and procedural programming, declarative programming, object-oriented programming, functional. These are all problem-solving paradigms. What are the new ones? Well, quantum certainly represents another one, and it's another way of thinking about a problem. Will others arise? I really don't know. I think that's an interesting one. In that conference, one of the main issues was the speed of calculation. And just remember, this was at a time when notions of computational complexity were still in the early development, right? You didn't really have a lot of these results until around the 70s, or the significant ones. Moore's law still remains an issue at this point, and quantum computers. So at this point, I was also thinking in terms of education, will we be actually programming in 2092 when we meet again? because I'm still surprised that we're programming it all today. And lastly, will someone in 2092 have solved the problem of computation, which I think is the most fascinating thing about computer science?
Awesome. Thank you for stepping us through the analog to digital to now selling pixels for millions of dollars, which have suddenly become $40 billion industry called NFTs. Coming to Liz now, understanding this evolution from a jobs lens, from your experience at the NSC, as well as the Rybit.net, which matches tertiary students with STEM or digital skills, how has the career options for computer science changed over the last couple of decades with the rise of technology jobs?
Thanks very much, Rashmi. So I probably won't concentrate on the last couple of decades because I think Maurice kind of covered that in his pretty well. So I'll focus on probably the last couple of years. And I think that there's been a huge, like a paradigm shift in the in the PR aspect of computer scientists. And that's really been driven by the tech titans. So you've got people like Mike Cannon-Brookes, Melanie Perkins, all of a sudden they've become the people that everyone's talking about. And the sort of unicorns that they've developed really means that it's changing the face of Australia in terms of how we're being recognised globally, not just for those companies like Atlassian and Canva, but for the talent that's been underpinning that. And I think they've been incredible in driving a lot of that change. So, and there's plenty of others, of course, safety culture and so many now that we can count as unicorns, which a few years ago, we weren't really even thinking this was possible. What that's meant is that you've actually had the computer scientist going from a geek to a glamourpuss. And that's been the single biggest change, I feel, that has been just so strongly driven in the current circumstances, particularly given the way that the world of work has changed so much. I'm going to focus on two areas. We've talked about all sorts of paths for computer scientists these days. The two areas that I see of particular interest relate to the whole data speciality of jobs and the software programming and development area. Now, this just gives you a sense of how things have changed. Data and its subset of jobs, being things like data analyst, scientist, architect, engineer, security specialist, has not even till last year been formally recognised as a job classification in the what's called the ANSCO, Australian New Zealand Classification of Occupation list, which is put out by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So software developers have been there, but it's only been that it's formally now recognised through a particular targeted review of jobs. And that's not the ABS's fault, because the ABS has been doing this for the last 22 years. It started off the labour market job occupation list, 2001. It's updated it 4 times. And because things have been moving so quickly, it's had to do a targeted update of emerging occupations. So November 2021, it came out as one of 25 emerging occupations. And that just gives you a sense of the fact that established organisation like ABS has to go and do this special consultation, which it has to do properly because it's a inter-country operation with New Zealand, to consult all the relevant industry groups to make an assessment of what actually is considered in this occupational group. And why that's important is because it affects the sort of skilled migration that Australia attracts. So where you have shortages, Australia sets quotas and parameters around who we want into the country. As everyone here knows, there's an incredible shortage of talent in the IT industry. So that's also another big change that has been growing, but again, COVID has really accelerated it. COVID and the advent of globalisation and technology. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I was talking to someone who'd just come back from Silicon Valley, and he was talking about this concept of negative unemployment, which I thought, what's that? You know, I had to Google it to understand it. And it was something that I thought was amazing because you had companies in Silicon Valley actually employing first-year programmers out of computer science school for $150,000 US a year, and then giving them an extra $100,000 to stay on, because what was happening was they were finding that people were moving 9 months into the job. They were being snapped up by someone else. And I thought, well, that could never happen here, could it? So that's sort of where we've come from, and it's a really interesting time in history right now, going through that. So I think just going back to your question around what are the career opportunities, you've got that whole data science speciality, and you've got that whole software programming speciality. So what's interesting is you've got front-end and back-end software, but increasingly there seems to be a demand for people who actually can do end-to-end. And I think why that's growing is because coupled along with all of this is this focus on the startup community. I remember when Pearcey was championing startups, 10 years ago, and everyone else was saying, well, so what? And of course, everyone wants to be part of a startup now. That's been a huge change where students, instead of going, I want to work for one of the big four or, a consultancy company or whatever, a corporation, they are now equally, and in some cases even more often, saying they'd like to start off by working at a startup. So that's been a huge change, that sense of being an entrepreneur and having that gravitas that you get from a computer science degree. So I think that that's a really great opportunity for more students to be moving into. And I think the other thing that is really of interest to me, and a few people have already touched on it in previous panels, so I won't go on, but the two main factors over the last 2 years have been COVID and climate change. And when I say that, I mean lots of things going on, but just in terms of media space and attention, if you like. And so what that is forcing is focus on those areas. And I think some tremendous outcomes have come out of that, where both young and older people are going, well, what can we do, to preserve the environment, protect it, to enhance it, and so on. So you've got that whole environmental, agri-tech, renewable area that is really showing a lot of interest and growth. And then you've got, with COVID, you've really got that unpacking of all the, not completely, but a lot of the old rules around, IP and people collaborating together for the first time to develop vaccines at record speed. And again, out of that are coming all sorts of, through those collaborations and through those solutions, new ways of working. And I think that that's really, really inspirational. So through, what has been a pretty torrid, terrible time for most people, and a gloomy time, you've got some really fantastic things of hope coming out for future computer science students to embrace. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for sharing the insights on data science as well as software engineering. I think students of the future will find that really useful. Chris, coming back to the new and emerging, sort of not new, but newish world of quantum computing. So how do you see the evolution from quantum computing lens?
Yeah, so right now, actually, in Piermont, there's the first Quantum Australia conference happening. I was there yesterday, and I'll be there this afternoon. There's a panel happening about how and why quantum startups are being funded. Prior to that, there was a panel about social responsibility in quantum computing. So it's interesting to see. In many ways, I think quantum computing is at the same state technology-wise as we were 70 years ago. But now we have all of this 70 years of history to guide us in the direction that we should go, although it may not follow the same path. So it's really in its infancy, and the questions that people are asking, from, say, the defense side is they want to know right now whether it's going to be better for shooting missiles or something. And from the business side, they have problems, finance has problems, transport has problems, and they want to know if quantum computers will be able to solve them tomorrow. But I think we need, another 70 years of development and answering some of these questions that people were probably asking 70 years ago about which directions to take the science. So as you said, the conference happened in the School of Physics, and that's, where quantum computing is today. It's in the School of Physics and in engineering departments. It's not yet in the School of Computer Science, although I'm at the Center for Quantum Software. So we do want to try to take some of the lessons that we've learned over the course of the last 70 years and tried to apply them as early as possible to quantum computing. But one of the phrases that I've heard a lot at such conferences in Australia is "it's early days." So I don't know if that's like an Australian term or phrase, but it's early days, and we don't really know. So maybe there's some lessons to be taken about how to deal with uncertainty when people want answers tomorrow.
Absolutely. I think the country that kind of gets to the race first, it's like any product, right? First market entry wins kind of thing. I think quantum computing is definitely at that cusp right now. So coming back to today, so now that we've reflected in the past, looking at today, Maurice, it appears that computer science has been largely focusing on technical problems, solving technical issues, since 1951 conference at least. But you have outlined some challenges that you see computer science facing today that are outside this realm of technical aspects. Could you perhaps touch upon the non-technical space and some of the challenges that you foresee in that space?
Yeah, as I said, I've already sort of, and some of the people before me, I think Genevieve gave an excellent introduction to some of these topics around ethical considerations, environmental factors that, as I say, we have not considered at all the environmental impact that our industry has on society, the technology and the politics. But I had actually, because we've prepared before, of course, I had written 2 notes, and my fantastic panelists before me, of course, have told us about the dystopian future. I just wrote social cohesion and the role of technology, not just privacy, just social interaction. So the other day I was just talking to one of my relatives whose son's at home, and he just picked up this IT job, like a help desk job. And he was telling me how he himself, who is in the IT industry, he loved working from home. And I said, yeah, look, that's great for you and me because we've sort of established our networks. But your poor son, surely this is not good for him. He needs to really go out there and meet people. And so those sorts of social cohesiveness questions are one. The other one, I think, is around education and the inequity or inequality that might be generated by those that are technically or digitally literate versus those that are not. And we're already sort of seeing that divide at the moment. And I think that's one of the things that we need to focus on. How can we make sure that we do not introduce inequality in that sense? And again, some of the people that have spoken before me also talked about issues around technology and inequality, diversity, and so on that really need to be addressed. So I think these are some of the issues that we need to be quite cognizant of as we move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Liz, coming to you then, with the rise of more and more open learning that we see so much of flashing on the ads that every newspaper that we read today, offering very specialized short-term courses, or maybe it could be data engineering, visualization, ClickSense, Tableau, that kind of thing. What are some of the challenges that you're witnessing today with the rise of open learning?
Yeah, good question, thank you. So what's really interesting is, when you think about it, massive open online courses have only been around for 10 years. So I think it was 2011, Sebastian Thrun set up Udacity. He had a few extra computer science courses, and as a bit of an experiment, he thought he'd throw them online and see what happened. And, and it kind of took off. And then other people jumped on board, like your Coursera's and Udemy's and so on. And then it was interesting because the whole movement sort of drifted a bit for a bit of time, to the point where I think in 2018, Udacity almost ran out of cash. And they had to completely reframe the business model. And, once again, COVID came to the rescue because You had the perfect, sandpit for trying this out. You had all these people sitting at home. What else are they going to do? They're going to do online courses. So it really provided a great opportunity for the whole MOOC and micro-credentialing business. And what you actually had was, with the improvements of the business model, you had a commodification to the point where it's no longer education as, a service and you're privileged to learn this, but the commodification and customisation to customers. So students were viewed in a much more retail way as customers. The great thing about it, as we all know, is you can do an online course in your own time. You can do it in bed, you can do it on the beach. It can take you 2 weeks, 2 months, depending on the level of complexity. It's been a huge challenge to educational institutions and also a great opportunity, and quite a few Australian universities have embraced it and done really well. The real trick, the challenge of it all is that sometimes you don't know where the line is about what is good and what is bad, and I think no one really knows that. And just because you've got an iconic name, associated with a course, doesn't always translate to it being a good course. And so therefore you've also got the rise of, the peer review of these courses, and it's putting more and more pressure on educational institutions all the time. Getting back to Maurice's point about you don't have that social interaction like you do at university, like most of us who went through, did. Also, good and bad. One of the good things is, if you're someone who's got social anxiety, they love doing online. It's just been such a boon for them. And, there's a lot of students, I think, increasingly in that situation, but there's obviously not so good things about it. I think there's a couple of other points I wanted to make. One of the other things that has happened is that all these different businesses have sprung out as a result of these MOOCs. The thousands of them are there now available for people to do, especially in this tech space. But there's businesses around them that are like, reviewing them or categorising. And there's also businesses now that are jumping together with corporations. Even, federal government has set up its own digital academy to upskill workers. And you're finding a lot of this stuff going offline from what was traditionally provided by universities to other providers. So they've very cleverly, gone into these niche markets. And I think that that's a real opportunity for universities still to pick up on. The other thing I wanted to say was the problem with these online credentials is that these days everyone can claim to be a data scientist or an analyst or, anything. So as someone, just to give a personal experience to wind up this comment, last weekend we had, I went through 82 applications for a data analyst that we're looking for on my team. And I don't think there was a single one that didn't have at least one or more, and more being up to 12, even 20 sometimes, micro-credentials alongside their core degree, where their core degree was computer science. And interestingly enough, I had applicants who included people with PhDs in, text mining, for example, down to people who'd done half a dozen Coursera courses, which were the short courses around data science or data and analytics. And so what that does mean is it means you're no longer getting, a certain type of person applying for a job. You're kind of, having everyone saying, I can do this, I've done a course. It's a real issue for employers because it therefore means they've got to set potentially their own tests, and unless you're technical yourself, you're not going to be able to properly evaluate whether someone's suitable for that type of role or not. So it's really, I think, creating a different sort of market and different factors coming out of that for us to think about, both as academics and industry people here. And the other thing that is, as you all know, is happening now is your Amazon and Googles, all the FANGs are saying, we don't need people with formal qualifications anymore. You can do a data camp course and that's good enough. It's all about your intrinsic skills and the transferability, and that's a challenge.
Thank you. I think a uni education and the breadth of exposure and the hands-on experience is unparalleled to any, I think. Chris, I've been ushered for 5 minutes, so I'll be very quick. What are some of the skill set requirements that you think the education of today necessitates in building a tech-savvy, STEM-educated Australian workforce?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll put on sort of my like deep tech hat and answer the question from that point of view, because apparently you can work at Google after taking 5 months of data science. But I think I see two problems that are coming up through the university, especially for students that have this idea that they're going to take an HDR path and then go into deep tech and solve complex problems. One is the foundation. I don't see a lot of good technical skills for the students that are coming into the university. Very few math skills, not a lot of programming, and definitely not a lot of problem-solving skills. And then the other problem is coming from the other end, which is this siloing effect, where ideally you would come in with a strong foundation, but then you kind of are forced to specialize and you create your own little silo and become a world's expert on one thing. We don't have any bridge builders. So there's a tension between wanting to be a generalist and perhaps not having a solid foundation in some good technical skills, and then being forced to be an expert on one thing. And so it's a real big challenge, and I think one of the things that we just need to come to grips with is time. And as a parent, when I see my kids wanting to play video games or go on Netflix, I only tell them one thing. I say, when you look back and ask, what am I good at? It's going to be what you spent time on. And so I'm a big believer in the 10,000 hour rule, and maybe we need a 20,000 hour rule now and possibly a 30,000 hour rule. Is you have to put in the work and you have to practice. I can't remember what Genevieve said. It was like productive problem solving or something. And I think there was a word, I don't know, I don't really hear it very often in Australia, but it's certainly a popular one in North America. It's called grit. And I think grit is something that's missing, and it goes along the lines of this sort of productive disagreement between people and being able to manage complex scenarios, including ones that maybe make you feel uncomfortable because there's something easier to do, like take out your phone and find out what's going on Instagram or Twitter. So I think there's a lot of possible answers, but these are the ones that I think are most important.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Grit, soft skills, problem solving, absolutely important, I think, for the future as well. A rapid fire round now, 20 seconds each. Leaping into the future, I will start from Chris and stop at Maurice. What are you most excited about in the future?
I'm most excited about quantum technology. The way I like to think about it is, if we build a large-scale quantum computer, we'll create in one small place in the universe the most extreme state of matter that has ever been seen. There will never be a time in the future, and there will never have been a time in the past where that state of matter existed in the universe, and it'll be something we created. So I'm really excited for that moment.
Thank you, Chris. Liz, what are you excited about in the future? Your top one or two things.
Yeah, look, I think it's just the possibilities, whether it's quantum, whether it's security, AI, ethics. I mean, there's so much going on. I'm excited about still more women getting into the industry. Pearcey's done a fantastic job in this space, and I think a lot of the work that Pearcey has done in the last 20 odd years has meant that you've got to focus now on, things like awareness of coding and stuff like that, being in the curriculum, a whole bunch of, girls coding. I mean, there's so many programs that we all know. And I think what I am excited is about, because things have been disrupted at a work level and an education level, more women can now come into the industry because it's actually much more flexible for them to learn. So the whole move over to online means that, you can have a baby and you can be, doing your masters or whatever, and, it's made it a lot easier, and I think I'm very hopeful about that being, an opportunity for more women to come into the industry.
Thank you. I think that's a very important one, especially women in STEM as a topic. I think we can all discuss it over lunch as well, but thank you, Liz, for that. Maurice, if we can end with you, what are you excited for in the future?
Okay, so I had three. One I just wrote was augmented intelligence. So a couple of years ago, I just was fortunate to be at an event where Garry Kasparov, along with beating 5 people simultaneously at chess, was talking about how nowadays you don't have any grandmaster versus grandmaster chess tournaments. I was going, yeah, that's right. I remember when I was a kid, they were great, like events, you know. And, you know, that song, The One Night in Bangkok, all's your oyster, you know. Anyway, but he pointed out that it's become grandmaster plus computer versus grandmaster plus computer. That's what the chess world has become. So I'd like to sort of see where my computer is able to interact with Liz and her computer and how those interactions go. The second one was really taking that on and then looking at how we can use that technology for good in terms of solving the inequalities of the world and making the world a better place. World peace, I added in there. And the last one, of course, is for someone to solve the computation problem so we can finally understand what it is.
I think 70 years from now, we will have an answer to that, hopefully. Someone would have solved the computational problem. Thank you for listening, everyone, and thanks for this amazing panel for the time as well.